Evening all, and welcome to this meeting of Colchester Council Governance and Audit Committee on the 25th of February 2025. I'm Councillor Chris Pearson, Councillor for Beerchurch, and I chair this committee. Just a few bits and pieces, especially as we have a number of visiting contributors this evening. Reminder that in the event of an emergency, and there are no practice alarms planned for this evening. So if the alarm goes off, there are two sets of stairwell to exit the building, one being the main staircase, the other one being a rear staircase just along the corridor. So please make your way down those and then to the car park in St Wall Street, where we'll check that everybody is safely out. This meeting is being held in the Grand Jury Room in the Town Hall at Colchester, in Colchester, and is being broadcast live on the Council's YouTube, where it will be for as long as YouTube exists, I imagine. Please then, could I ask speakers to remember to turn your mics on when you are speaking and turn them off when you cease to speak. Members of the committee are informed that they can use electronic devices, but if doing so, please set them to silent. And if you want to record anything or take any video or photos, please do so discreetly. There are toilets on every floor in the building, and should anyone need it, an induction loop in this room. We will have a short break around 7:30 if the meeting is carrying on, which I anticipate it will this evening. So I'm just going to ask, starting from my left, for members of the committee and officers who service the committee all through the meeting to introduce themselves at this point. Richard?
Richard Block, Chief Operating Officer.
Councillor Paul Smith, St Anne's and St John's Ward and Deputy Chair.
Councillor Sean Kelly, Wivenhoe Ward.
Good evening, Councillor Sarah Naylor, Lexton and Raythwaite Ward.
Councillor William Sunnox, Rural North Ward.
Good evening, Councillor Paul Dundas, Tiptree Ward.
Sam McLean, Newtown and Christchurch Ward.
Anna D'Alessandro, Interim Chief Finance Officer.
Chris Hartgrove, Deputy Section 151 Officer.
Jeff Bills, Strategic Housing and Assurance Manager.
Chris Wade, Director of Assets for Colchester Borough Homes.
Esme Cole, Chair of the Board, Colchester Borough Homes.
Philip Sullivan, Chief Executive, Colchester Borough Homes.
Matthew Evans, Democratic Services Officer.
Right, thank you everyone. There are no substitutions this evening. The committee is here in person and in full. I'm not aware of any urgent items. Declarations of interest. Does anybody have anything that they wish to declare before we go any further this evening? I'm not seeing any indication, so we'll move on then to item 5, minutes of the meeting held on the 26th of November to begin with. Anything in those minutes as a matter of accuracy that anyone wishes to raise? I'm not seeing anything, so can I just have a quick show of hands for approval of those, please? Thank you. Those are approved. And the minutes held on the 3rd of December 2024, any indications as to inaccuracy? Nope, not seeing anything. So again, just a quick show of hands, please, to approve those. Thank you. So they're both approved as a correct record. Item 6, have your say. As usual, the public hordes were beating down the door as we came in this evening. I am not aware of anyone indicating a have your say. And at this point, I just need to slap myself on the wrist because I've forgotten to ask our two individuals who are online just to introduce themselves and make themselves known as well. So, Andrew, can I ask you just to introduce yourselves to everyone, please?
Good evening, Andrew Small, Section 151 officer.
Welcome, Andrew. Mark?
Good evening, Chair and all. Councillor Mark Corey, Resources Portfolio Holder and Ward Member for Wivenhoe.
Thank you both and welcome. So that moves us then swiftly on to item 7, which is the social housing landlord performance for Q3. And Philip, I'm presuming you're going to start with this one, please.
Thank you very much. Good evening. This is the Q3 performance report for the council in its capacity as social housing landlord. In a minute, I'll pass over to Chris, who will highlight key metric performance for Q3. Jeff will then introduce the proposed 25-26 targets. I'll highlight a couple of points before handing over to Esme, who will provide additional Q3 assurance from Colchester Borough Homes. So if I can hand over to Chris, please.
Thank you. I'm going to start on area 5.1. I'll give a brief update on our performance. It's important to note that the performance was reported on the 18th of February to the Ops and Performance Committee, and they raised no concerns. Some of the key points that I need to highlight are in 5.2. We've got two areas that we're working towards to get into 100%, both in asbestos and electrical safety, and we're confident we'll get there towards the end of this financial year. Voids, well, void performance, we've had quite a high number of voids in the last quarter, 110 properties that have been vacated, and we are still hitting the top quartile performance when we compare ourselves with our peers according to Housemark. Repairs is another area of focus. As you can see, we are just below our target of 90% target on time. For our repairs, we're at 89.61. I presented a deep dive on our contractor performance, which is pulling those numbers down a little bit. And we have now got an action plan in place to talk to our external providers that are actually causing this slight dip. I don't know what's it from me on the highlights. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. So attached to this report at Appendix 2 is a set of landlord performance targets for 25-26, which have been worked on in conjunction with CBH. The tables show in-year performance as at Q3, along with the target for 24-25 and the proposed target for 25-26 and beyond. The suite of KPIs will provide monitoring of the ALMO and monitoring of regulatory compliance requirements for 25-26, and these have been provided this evening for any comments or recommendations from the committee. As agreed last year, we have 3 areas of performance monitoring: performance of the ALMO, compliance with legislation and regulation, and customer satisfaction. And this will also include a tenant satisfaction measure survey on top of this, carried out at the end of the summer, as required by the regulator. There is one new target included in this year's performance KPIs in relation to the number of new council lets during the year, and contextual information will be provided on top of this, where comparison will be able to be made around the supply and demand for housing. 5 of these KPIs appear on the council's corporate dashboard, and currently these are the number of households in temporary accommodation, percentage of rent collected, days to re-let general needs properties, percentage of homes that meet the decent home standard, and customer satisfaction with the latest repair. In conjunction with these indicators, for monitoring of the compliance and safety areas, a report will be provided to the committee during 25-26 to give assurance on how the council is complying with regulation in this area. And the customer satisfaction data regarding repairs included within the medium-term delivery plan will be transactional surveys completed at the point of completing the red of works or process. and just need to be aware that these transactional surveys will have a different outcome to the tenant satisfaction measures, which are a perceptional survey conducted at a later date.
Included in the report is also a brief regulation update, an update on complaints, including ombudsman cases and, importantly, lessons learned. If I can highlight in section 9, there's an updated work plan that's been set out at Appendix 2. That takes account of steps taken following the mock inspection completed by Savills last year on adherence to the regulatory framework, and that's for consideration this evening as Appendix 4. And then Section 10, the outcome of one relevant internal audit ASB is provided in 10.1, and as also referred to in 9.1 and 10.2 of the report, to highlight to committee that some additional audits of relevance to expectations for landlord services have been incorporated into the 25-26 internal audit action plan that's been approved by CBH's Finance and Audit Committee. If I can hand you over to Esme, please.
Thank you and good evening. Section 11 details the assurance that have come up from the CBH committees through board to give you the committee assurance. I won't go through them all, there's quite a lot of detail, but just to highlight that our terms of reference for committees and board, they have been updated to ensure that there's a streamlined flow of assurance coming through committees to our board and to full council through this committee. We've done extensive resident engagement and we can provide assurance to you that we're meeting the regulators' expectations. But just to say that we continually strive to increase our pool of engaged residents and to offer more opportunities for them to be involved, to scrutinise and to contribute to the board. And as part of this, we have our tenant scrutiny panel, and they provide a number of deep dives and report backs to board, and they come and sort of personally report that back to board. Of the 3 major dives they've done, they were happy to sign off 2 of their scrutinies, and they've now been closed, and there's one outstanding on the lettings experience, and that should be provided back in about 6 months' time. Naturally, we do a lot of focusing on our risk register, strategic risks, just to highlight that we've incorporated the regulator sector risk profile into our strategic risk map, which we did on an away day back in December. And a number of the committees have provided deep dives into areas such as the Finance and Audit Committee, who did a deep dive into the stock quality, and they're happy that the risk register is reporting that. Chris has gone through a number of the areas that the Ops and Performance Committee have looked into, but just to say there's a number of action plans coming out of that, one of them being the disparity between our in-house contractors versus our outsourced or outsourced contractors, and the difference in performance between those, and another action plan on the tenant satisfaction measures. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. If I can open up to any questions, please, and then for the recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you. Right. I see a slew of hands. I'm not quite sure whose went up first, but I'll take them in this order just because it works down the line. Paul D first.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation. Just a couple of observations and questions, really. We have a perennial problem, don't we, around the voids, and it's usually down to the maintenance, the conditions the properties are being left in. Just on the repairs and repairs target, I take it that doesn't include voids. That's for occupied premises only. Thank you. My question was also around the EPCC target. Now, my guess on this is that we've been tackling properties which are relatively easy or possible to bring up to C. In other words, we've been doing the low-hanging fruit. But as we probably get to that sort of 90%, we start to get into properties of a certain age or a certain type, which are potentially not viable to bring up to EPCC. My question is how many of those, and apologies if it's in there somewhere, but I haven't spotted it, how many of those do we think we're going to be left with? What's the sort of time scale? So I presume we're going to be looking at disposal. And how do we actually deal with that when we have a long-term tenant possibly in place where we're going to have to effectively dispose of the premise, the dwelling they're in? So that's one question. And my other question is also perhaps around the general future of the HRA, because we know there's an HRA review going on. It's taking many, many months to emerge, but we know it will soon. And being realistic, it's probably not to come out and say that actually we've got a lot more money than we thought. It's going to say the opposite. Okay, we are going to probably realistically say we potentially cannot afford to do or offer the service we are currently offering. I don't know, what's the analogy? We currently offer a Rolls-Royce or a Mercedes service, but perhaps we're heading more to the sort of Dacia end, perfectly functional and does the job, but maybe not with any luxuries on top. Do we think that will mean that we have to assess some of the targets we're currently setting ourselves in terms of tenant satisfaction, the targets we're looking at this evening? Or do we think realistically they're still going to be achievable? It's just to give an idea of direction.
Thanks very much, Councillor Dundas. And I might bring Chris in, but perhaps I can start on the EPC. So at the moment, as you'll have seen, we have 87% of homes at EPC C or above. We have about 700 at D, roughly about 50, just over 50 at E, and 1 at F from memory. We also have secured Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund, and that's being used to target the toughest ones to get up to the C. Our Head of Asset Management is confident we can achieve that 100% by 2030. What I would say is that we're confident, but if we do come across a property where it is disproportionately expensive to do that, we will need to look at pragmatic solutions to that. It'd be wrong to preempt them, but I wouldn't rule out disposal. But we're not in that position. We are confident with the EPC C or above by 2030, and we're in a relatively strong place as a council compared to others. In terms of the future of the HRA, completely accept your comments and your questions as well. And just to assure you that there is a workshop being arranged for all councillors and CBH board members. I believe we have a provisional date in March for that. And then it will work its way through committee stage as well for that scrutiny and further awareness. You're right to highlight about the investment strategy, the investment in existing homes. As a council, that investment has been very strong and I would say very positive in recent years, which means that we have very high levels of decent homes compliance. We will always strive to continue with that, but I would very much expect the discussions at the workshop and thereafter to be looking at, amongst other things, that investment strategy. So decent homes or decent homes plus or what that strategy should look like into the medium and long term. And if we do scale back from our current investment strategy, so planned works, kitchens, bathrooms, the frequency that we do that, you're right to highlight that could have a knock-on effect on satisfaction. So we may need to adjust some of the metrics depending on the council's decisions on investment in the future.
Thank you. All right, Councillor Dundas. Councillor Sunnox. I thought your hand went up. Councillor Naylor. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to return to the point that was made about re-lettings, because obviously this is one of the key focuses, is how quickly we can rehouse house someone in need. A couple of things. I'm trying to hit average days to re-let properties. Could you just explain, to help me understand, how you arrived at the target of 73 for 24-25? And first of all, and second of all, obviously congratulations on being in the upper quartile. That's good news. As ever, we like to see even greater improvement. So my next question, of course, is what's your strategy and timeline for improving that further, and where do you think you can get to by when? Thank you.
I'll pick up the first bit about how we got to the target last year. So the target of 73 was a new target based on the tenant satisfaction information that we have to provide to the regulator, and that was based on benchmark data from other local authorities, and we used the upper quartile figure, which was 73 days. But obviously performance has been much better during the year.
Just on performance, there's a number of things that we do already. That's to make sure that we have the contract supplier in place and they're working to the targets we're setting them. We also make sure we've got enough staff to do the void inspections, because that sometimes fluctuates. And this year we've got quite a few more voids than we've had before, so we've had to flex with that. I think what's important is that myself and the other director, Karen, we attend the meetings to make sure everyone's on top of things. And it's constantly under review to make sure we support our teams to make sure they hit those targets. It's a challenging area. I'm actually attending a Housemark meeting tomorrow, which is going to have many different landlords on it, because out there at the moment, every single landlord is experiencing higher costs on voids, more voids coming through, and times taking longer. One of the things that we've introduced, which has been very helpful, is to have someone do more pre-tenancy checks to make sure residents are aware of what they need to do to clear the properties and not leave them in a mess and fix things. And sometimes we've actually stopped void, that going ahead because the condition of the properties. So the more that we can do, the more we can influence the overall times. Thank you.
Thank you. So, do you want to follow
yeah,
up?
just my final point, just if someone could answer the point, how much further do you hope to improve this and by when?
Yeah, okay, yeah, I mean, we're looking at the targets all the time. It's something we want to get better at. We haven't set ourselves a particular target at the moment, but it's always under review, and it's something we can pick up with our operations and performance committee to make sure we're stretching ourselves as best as we can.
Thank you. I think I'd follow up on that as well. Do you actually have a stretch target? Because my anxiety around voids has always been the amount of time that means that someone who's homeless is in temporary accommodation or in totally unsuitable accommodation, and also the impact on the coffers of the council to temporarily house someone. So I'm just wondering whether you actually do have a stretch target as well as the targets that we're seeing in front of us.
I think that's an important point, and it's a good challenge, because at the moment the proposed targets for next year are much better than what's out there, much better than this year's target, but I think it's a fair challenge to say, is it challenging enough? Because we're proposing to drop from 73 days to 55 days. That's on older persons accommodation as well as general needs and temp accommodation. Some of that does take longer because of for various reasons. So I think that's a fair challenge, and certainly it's something I would be happy to take up with the portfolio holder, so that you can have assurance that we are pushing ourselves, being realistic but challenging.
Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. I think that's helpful, and I think the committee members would welcome seeing some stretch targets at future meetings. So thank you for that. Councillor Kelly, your hand was up next.
Thank you, Chair. This Appendix 2 is brilliant. I love it. I think this is really good. From the first one that I saw originally to where this is now, because I think this is quite a little bit different to how it was before. This is exactly what I was imagining I would be able to see. Year-on-year improvements is clearly laid out. I think this is really good. I think lots of other areas within the council could learn from the way that you guys have presented this, because I personally find this extremely easy to digest, and this is exactly what I would like and what I think the public who would look at this document would be able to understand as well. And I think it's really good. And I've been able to see clearly that you've been making year-on-year improvements across most of your performance targets, and that was easy to get that information out in one go. So I just think that's worth noting, and I think it's impressive, and I like it. I think it's really good, and I think the public will see that too. So I think that was good. One thing it highlighted to me, and this was because it was easy to see, was I noted that your working days lost due to sickness absence has gone up, and whether or not there's a reason for that, or whether you can sort of explain what's going on there, because everything looks good except that one looks bad. So I'm just wondering if there's an explanation for that particular line.
Thank you.
I'm glad Councillor Kelly's picked that one up, because I was going to throw that one out as well. Thank you.
Yeah, we have had several colleagues on long-term sickness, and that's pushed the numbers up. Of the several, most of them that have been off for some time, that has been resolved. So I would expect over time for that to start to come down. It's on a 12-month rolling basis, so sometimes it takes a bit of time to work its way through. But a material chunk of that has been because of some staff on long-term sick, and we've been challenging that and addressing that.
Yeah,
if I may just come in on that as well. We actually picked that up at the last board meeting. We were looking at all of the performance metrics to see that we're all increasing, and that was a glaring difference. And so we're seeking some assurance through staff surveys and temperature checks, and so we'd like that to come to the board more fully. So just to let you know that we have picked that one up ourselves.
Thank you. I think that's really helpful. I know in my managerial role, I was always looking at long-term versus short-term, and also the types of sickness absence, what they were related to. It's interesting that I think in most public sector organisations, stress is often one of the significant indicators of sickness absence, but that may not be the case with CBH, I don't know. But I think that might be something that we would want to see a bit of drill down on, just at least once over the next municipal year. Councillor Kelly, anything else?
No, that was all.
Thank you. Councillor Smith.
Thanks, Chair. I too was going to pick up on that one, so I won't ask that question. One question that has been raised, benchmarking. There have been suggestions that we're not comparing apples with pears, people are picking the people they're comparing with. Can you give us some assurance that these are genuine comparisons, like for like, that we can trust these figures, please?
I can. So we use Housemark. It is the sector benchmarking organisation that, it'd be wrong to say without exception, but housing associations, local authorities use, they are the go-to, and that's why we use them.
Excellent, because looking at these figures, the relative performance across most indicators looks extremely good. And looking at the Appendix 2 figures again, there are some very strong performances and indicators in there. And I think, Chair, we should congratulate CBH on the improving performance that we're seeing, because it wasn't always like this. There was times when we were seeing voids, lettings going the wrong way, customer satisfaction deteriorating. So I think where we see improvement, we should record that and say that's doing extremely well. I also note, looking at the targets, the ones for housing options and homelessness, and I'm not quite sure really why it's in here, because it's not one that you can control. I'm not sure the government can control that particular target. It's a number of people who present for homelessness to us, but it is going up an awful lot. Is that trend still continuing?
I'm afraid to say it is. So homelessness, number of households we've assisted with temporary accommodation between March 24 and January 25 have increased by 36%. So whilst we are being relatively innovative in terms of how we accommodate them, the pressure continues to be intense.
Thank you. I do note the targets as in there. If we've had a 30%, 36% increase, and we've got in a target that's below where we are at the moment, that's a very difficult target to achieve. So perhaps those are ones that we do need to look at a little bit.
Right, thank you. Councillor Sunnox.
Yes, I am completely confident and happy that the targets you're looking at, you know, they're being monitored. If something goes into the orange or the red, you seem to be taking it very seriously, and it seems to be correcting itself. So the systems are there, and to a certain extent, this can be dealt with. You've got your governance at CBH board level, and it's working. Tick. Okay. The interesting thing is the things you're not looking at, and it goes back to, I think, your chair mentioned terms of reference. And I hope that the terms of reference is something that this committee would look at, because my big concern, I'm going to repeat it just because, just to make sure it's sunk in. Terms of reference should not be to look at CBH, the managing agent. It should be to look at the whole of the HRA, the asset as well as the income statement. And there are some areas there where I think that really the organisation you could have could do a lot. Accounting for repairs, I'm convinced there's something wrong with it. I'm sure there isn't, but you know, we have no external audit. I don't think it's appropriate to ask the internal auditors to do it. People most likely to pick up on it will probably be yourselves. You know, could we ask that someone from CBH has an overview of HRA accounting, and that there's some governance around that? The next one is again the cost efficiency and benchmarking. So the benchmarking figures are coming out quite different to what I'm seeing from the financial accounts. I believe the financial accounts, and this is the HRA accounts, not your accounts. And frankly, I just can't see how they reconcile with the benchmarking. And I've been asking for ages to see where the figures for our costs, particularly our management costs, come from. And they don't tie up at all with what appears in our accounts. And it's that difference that I think is, well, it's going to be the subject of a budget amendment we're putting forward tomorrow. So it will be debated and discussed. But these benchmarking organisations seem to work where, you know, we submit figures, everyone submits figures. Whether everyone is submitting the right figures or not, you never know. And particularly where we've got this confusion between the responsibility of the board for CBH. Are we submitting to the benchmarking organisation the CBH figures or the whole of the HRA figures, consolidating out the sort of intercompany management fee stuff? So there's a couple of areas where I think we're not shining the telescope, and that going forward we should.
Thank you, Councillor Sunnox. I'm not expecting you to be able to respond to all the detail of Councillor Sunnox's remarks there. I think I would just throw in my two penneth that we are aware that the HRA review is taking a bit longer than was originally anticipated. And hopefully, once we've done that, that will clarify a number of the concerns that there are around the committee. Over to you.
Thank you. And I mean, you're absolutely right that the first comment, Councillor Sunnox, in terms of HRA accounting and ownership, we do have that review taking place at the moment in the workshop. In terms of the cost of CBH and the non-CBH costs, where I've had questions, I've tried to be fully transparent, both in terms of the costs and what they relate to. So I have tried to be transparent. We have asked Savile specifically to challenge CBH, our management and maintenance costs. So I would hope, and I wouldn't hope, I would expect that you will get some feedback through the HRA review as well.
Thank you, Philip. I haven't seen any other questions, comments, so there's just one for me, and that is for you to take away and perhaps bring back to us in the next municipal year. We're all aware of the elephant in the room, and that is local government review. And my question to you, my challenge to you, I suppose, posing is how are you considering LGR? I know it's still in its infancy, but is the board looking at that, and what do you need to bring back to us about how that's likely to impact going forward?
I think LGR is still relatively new, and I think we're all considering the implications of that broadly as well as specifically for housing. I think what is a key consideration for CBH and our board and exec is we need to look at what is the right solution for local people. For the tenants of Colchester and beyond. We feel we have a very effective, efficient, high standard of service in Colchester. But we need to reflect and consider what that means from an LGR point of view. It is early days, but I'm sure over the coming months. And what I would say is that the board is alert to it. We had a board meeting last week, and I provided the presentation, an update that's consistent with the communication that's been shared with colleagues at the City Council, so that we're all working in tandem, and we can then make sure that we support and influence the right direction for residents and the City Council.
Thank you. That's good to hear, Mr. Sullivan. And I think I would just echo Councillor Kelly's remarks about the quality of the report. I think we've made suggestions over the course of the reporting that you've provided to us, and I think it is now set out in a much easier to follow format and gives us what we need in terms of identifying where the trends are, where there are some exceptions in terms of performance, but also indicates the high quality of performance at Colchester Borough Housing. Councillor Dundas, I saw your hand go up there before I close the
very
item
briefly
down.
to follow up on your good comment and question actually regarding LGR, and we do have to talk about it because we know, it's not a hypothetical really now. We know it is almost certainly going to happen, and I'm sure you're aware of it, but it's important that the board do crystallise really what CBH does and why it needs to exist, because the reality is in just over 2 years' time, you're going to have to be convincing councillors who are not used to running an HRA and are not used to running an Almo housing management company, who have a very different view. This is I'm not telling people anything which isn't public. We know that we're going to be merging with councils who have an entirely different approach to providing social housing. So the challenge is CBH is going to have to justify itself, and it's going to have to persuade people who in the past have perhaps had an entirely different view that it should continue. And I just think it's important that the board, and I know you will, because I know you're as aware of this as I am, that you are prepared for that. That's just general comment. And I'm not saying anything controversial there, it's just anybody can see it.
Thank you, Councillor Dundas. I think that was my reason for raising it, because the anticipated lay of the land suggests that Colchester City Council will merge with probably a couple of other neighbouring authorities who, as Councillor Dundas has highlighted, have a variety of views. I think those of us who know how well CBH performs locally for residents who are in need in Colchester are keen to ensure that CBH is ready for that new world. Councillor King, did you want to quickly? I saw your hand go there because I was just about to close, but
It's just my favourite subject of LGR and devolution. And Paul, you and I are amongst those who are having this kind of exploratory conversation. The only thing I wanted to add to round this out, it's a very good question and a very great challenge for everybody, is it won't start in 27. This is a conversation that will have to start and will in the coming months. So some know that the three most likely partners in North East Essex, heaven help us, what might happen more generally, of tendering Braintree and Colchester, we seem to fit most of the criteria. If, as proposed, we are confirmed as a unitary authority, if the timeline is confirmed as expected, so many ifs, in April 27, in between now and then we're going to be in shadow board arrangements. And what does that mean? Well, kind of in the title, we'll be getting to understand strengths, weaknesses, assets, credits, challenges, philosophies, the whole works, and we're making a start on that. So to yourselves, I kind of reinforce the challenge, but I put it with some comfort that we've got some time because we're going to start early. Thank you, Chair, for your indulgence.
Thank you, Councillor King. I'm going to give you the last word, Esme.
I just wanted to just sort of come in on this topic because I am just as passionate as you all that we get our sort of narrative in place, and Philip and I have already been talking about this for some time, and the reason we brought it to board was just to make sure everyone around the board table was up to speed on what was taking place. So rest assured that there's work taking place on this already, and we're just as passionate as everybody around this table that we get this in order. So
thank you, and well done. Thank you, Philip, thank you, Esme, thank you, Chris, and thank you, Jeff, for your contributions this evening. Right, just in terms of recommended decisions, members, we were required to make comments and recommendations. We have done, and I think the portfolio holder is here and has heard. We've suggested one or two things to the members from CBH who've attended this evening to take away. We're also asked to note the complaints update, the landlord assurance work plan provided in Appendix 4, the additional regulatory assurance being provided by CBH's board and committees. I think that's it. I think we've done all of that. Are we in agreement? Yep. There you go. That moves us on to... That moves us on to item 8, the Treasury Management Quarter 3 update. Chris, is it you or Andrew who's introducing this one? Thanks, Chris. Over to you then, please.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, members. Item 8.1 then, on the agenda this evening is the Treasury Management Quarter 3 update, which appears on pages 57 to 70 of your document pack, and sets out the position for 24-25 based on available information as of the 31st of December 2024. I don't propose to go through the report in detail, Chair, but just to remind the committee that this report provides an update on the adopted Treasury Management Strategy for 24-25, which was considered by this committee on the 18th of June 2024 and was subsequently adopted by full council on the 17th of July. On to the detail then. Suffice to say it continues to be a quiet financial year on the Treasury Management front. Slippage on the capital programme, which has led to a major reprofiling within the budget proposals for 25-26, has been contributing to a suppressed need for external borrowing, with overall borrowing presented on pages 62 to 64 of your report declining from 151.6 million to 147.6 million during the first 9 months of the year. In other words, a £4 million decline. Treasury management investments presented on page 65 have fallen by 12.9 million during the same period, from 25.6 million to 12.7 million since the start of the financial year. The managed reduction in investment balances is further suppressing the need for external borrowing. Performance against the Treasury management indicators is also presented beginning on page 67. Targets have been met in nearly all cases, with the only exception being the liquidity risk indicator, where there's been a short-term technical breach. Total cash available within 3 months temporarily fell to 12.751 million at the quarter end, which is below the target balance of 20 million. A council the size of Colchester has millions of pounds obviously passed through its books on an almost daily basis, so strict adherence to this indicator requires a robust cash flow forecasting process, and experience shows that the council is adept at having access to sufficient instant access funds to avoid a net overdrawn position with the bank, but could perhaps do a little better in managing the interrelationship with short-term investments. I am conscious that this is a repeat of quarter two, and have drafted in more senior qualified resources since January to assist, and the balance has been successful. The balance was back up to just over 25 million by the 31st of January. This is a topic that I've flagged for review by internal audit in the year ahead, and suffice to probably just to reassure the committee, no money's been lost or anything. It's just a risk indicator. So happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Hartgrove. I've got Councillor Dundas, then Councillor Sonex.
Thanks. Just a couple of very brief questions. This may well be a typo, but on page 63 on the list of PWB loans, we've got one at 8.875% maturing 21st of May 55 for 1.3 million. If that, it seems oddly high compared to the rest. If that is correct, would it not make sense to perhaps try and pay that off? Because again, it just sort of stood out. Last time we had a discussion actually when we discussed this last time about the £9 million with Barclays Bank, the two loans maturing quite a long time out, 76 and 78. Of an age where I see that, and I still think it's 1976 and 1978, but it's not. We were going to see if we were just curious to know what those were. I guess they were some sort of mortgage or something. I'm just wondering if we do know what they are. And my other question is, how do we know we're holding quite a lot of money in grants of the town deal money, which I think some of which has been drawn down, which we've actually had trouble spending due to various delays in the capital programme. How do we account for how we hold that? Is that money in here? If it's not, how do we invest that, or how do we hold that pending actually spending it? Thanks.
Over to you, Chris. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for those. So first of all, the interest rate, the 8.875%, and the Barclays loan, we've had those questions before. I can assure you that they're both correct. I did check them, and I had the same questions myself. It predates by some distance my time with the council, but they are literally what they say on the tin. There's an 8.875 loan, 5% loan, which was, at the time it was taken out, it was a normal-ish competitive rate, I assume. So the historic records would indicate that. And the Barclays loan, likewise, back in the day, PWLB rates were not as sort of dominant as they are at the moment. There was some number of bank loans taken out by lots of councils up and down the country at competitive interest rates, better than PWLB rates. So those are quite normal, if you like. In terms of grants received in advance for town deal, etc., so they're basically just included in our balance sheet resources within our cash as a result of holding those loans in advance of spend. It just means that we can delay going out to borrow externally for the purposes of our capital programme, so we enjoy the benefits, the short-term benefits of those receiving those loans in advance.
Thank you. All right, Councillor Dundas?
Yeah, I mean, that's what, I mean, I think you answered my question. My question was really, are we deriving as a benefit and holding that money short term? I'm happy to hear that we are.
Councillor Sunnock.
Yes, just to follow up on that one, and then I've got some more substantive ones. What's the other side of the journal? So we're holding the cash, the grant money is cash. Are we holding the other side of it as provision, or are we holding it as creditor? There must be a debit and there must be a credit.
Chris, could you just put your mic on, please?
It will be on our balance sheet at the year end, so you'll see capital grants received in advance. We've got
as a creditor.
We've got it on our balance sheet as a creditor. Yeah, it's a credit. Yeah.
Thank you. That's where it should be. That's good. That's good. And then more substantively, I was just really pleased to see that we've adjusted our interest rate assumptions in the budget. We've looked properly at with the proper explanation of our borrowing rates with the you know the whatever it is rates, the seriousness rate or whatever it's called that we have, and then the HRA rate, and we're using different rates. So that's absolutely great. But once again, it's this table here that is the sort of balance sheet summary and cash and forecast, which I think it's meant to show what our new borrowing is over the next 3 years. And it's gone up to a much higher figure. I've always said the figure on this thing I thought was too low. Now it seems to be massively high. And if I look back to September, we said that our new borrowing in 2028 would be 65.5 million, and now it's gone up to 147 million. Well, that's really just a huge difference in new debt. And I can't see how it arises, and there's no figure on that calculation that I can follow, and there's nothing here that looks to me like a cash flow as to, you know, where you take your capital expenditure. We got very good, clear reporting on the capital expenditure budgets, so we can see what we think is going to be new debt there, and we should be able to calculate from that what our new debt is really quite simply. And I just think it's fundamental to the budget. We're going into a budget. I reckon it's about 150 million you're going to have to borrow by the end of the 5-year period. It would be really nice to know that was consistent with what we were doing here, and that we've got some way of sort of giving us confidence the figures are right on here. A figure in a quiet year, a swing from 65 million borrowing to 147 million borrowing is really big.
Councillor Sunnock, just to assist members of the committee, could you give us an indication of where you're referring to with you? I was quickly scrolling through trying to find it.
I'm not going to be able to give you a page
60.
number.
Right.
Yeah, it's
Thank you. Somebody has found it.
Somebody's found it.
Page
yeah.
60. So just so that everybody's on the same page. Thank you.
Yes.
Mr. Hargrove, back to you then.
Sorry, Chair, in the short answer to that is in the budget there's been a major reprofiling of the capital programme, so that shifts borrowing expectations significantly. One of the things it's doing is pushing grants, mentioned by Councillor Dundas earlier on. A lot of those are grant funded schemes, so as the council delivers those grant funded schemes in 25, 26 and 26, 27, which is assumed in the reprofiled budget, then those grants will be spent. As a result of that, the council will have to go out and borrow externally to increase, and as a consequence will increase its external borrowing. So.
All right. Councillor Sunnock?
That is logical in isolation. The question is what's changed since last September, and is this method of reporting producing stable results, or are the projections of what we've got to borrow flicking around by almost double?
there's been a fundamental change in the profile in the capital programme, which is reflected in the numbers here.
All right, thank you. Did I see any? Councillor Kelly. You've got another one, Councillor Simmons.
Sorry. Yes. The other thing is the MRP policy at the back of this. MRP is probably our second biggest cost after no, probably the third because it comes behind interest. But it's one of our biggest costs. And we've got a lovely policy here. I just think it would be really useful in future for the committee to see the numbers on that because it's so insightful as to where we spent our money and where this is costing us money. I don't think there's anything secret about it. It's mechanical stuff, but it's really, really important because it's not soft like depreciation, which is reversed out of everything. It hits us right in the reserves.
All right, thank you. One more, all right.
And the other thing is that, and it's not strictly here, so I am straying a little bit, Chair. The reserves forecast and the budget. We've got a reserves forecast yesterday as part of the budget, and it showed us that we won't be using the general fund to fund the structural deficits. So it's a question: am I right in assuming that the administration will either have to raise taxes or cut costs if they're not using reserves? Is it right to assume that our budget is assuming that?
All right, I think that's probably an item or a matter for you to put before the budget meeting tomorrow evening.
Well, I feel it's a matter for now because this is, without that assumption, this is single entry bookkeeping. It's just wrong. If you've got a deficit, it eats into your reserves. If you haven't got a deficit, you've got to either, or if you're projecting not to have a deficit, you either have to cut your costs or increase your income. It's arithmetic.
That is the implied assumption in the report, but the administration has the flexibility to do a number of different things, and that's a political answer, but not for me, Chair.
Thank you. And I'm sure that Anna, who's sitting here, and welcome, Anna, has heard your remarks about what you'd like to see the accounts looking like going forward, but not necessarily how they will look going forward. Councillor Kelly.
Thank you. This is a much simpler question, hopefully. And I've probably asked something similar to this before. I'm still a bit confused about it. So there are 3 loans to other. Sorry, no. I think this is part of the question as well. I think we've borrowed money from 3 authorities, and I think we've lent money to 2 authorities. I think that's right. Of the 3 that we've that we've borrowed money from, it looks like we've got to pay one of them back really soon. And how are we handling that? That looks like we owe them £5 million. We've got to pay them back really in a couple of months. And then on the 2 Eastleigh and Wirral, I think who we've loaned money to, there's no maturity date or anything in that table. I was wondering when we would likely get that money back again, and whether or not my understanding that I've just put it is correct, because I'm not sure if I'm even right. Thank you.
Sorry, can I answer those in reverse order? I've got the answer to one in my head.
Yeah.
So, in terms of the investment, the Eastleigh Borough Council investment, I happen to know this off the top of my head quite randomly, but we did actually roll over that investment. So it did mature, I can't remember the exact date, sometime in February in the last couple of weeks or something, and that's been rolled over. So that's one of the options we have. We can either reinvest if we don't need the cash, that particular interest rate. I think we had the option to roll over at the same rate, which we have done, 5.5%, quite competitive. And the other examples, the local authority loans, that's local authorities that we've borrowed from. So in that instance, we've actually borrowed, we had outstanding borrowing of 9 million at the start of the year. We've repaid 4 million, and we've still got 5 million outstanding that's not due to mature until 22nd of May. So it's all dictated by partly by cash flow and available rates and stuff like that. So, you know, I talked earlier about the cash buffer of £20 million that we tried to keep. That's one of the factors that goes into it. Available cash coming in from tax receipts, the demands of the capital programme are uneven. You know, spend doesn't happen on an even pattern all the time. So there's a whole range of factors go into it.
Thank you. Councillor Kelly, does that answer your question?
Nearly. Just does the two that the maturity was in 2024.
Can you just to make it easy for everyone?
Sorry,
can you
yes.
just
so that's
refer
on,
to the table or the page, please?
I've lost it now. Table 5. It is table 5. Yeah, thank you. The two that were maturity date in 2024 have they been paid back? And then the one that is due to mature in May, we're about to pay back. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. Yep. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Chair. I think there'll be lots of questions like this as we go along, but it just occurred to me with the loans to and from particularly other local authorities, do we have any sense of how those will be treated during the process of local government reform? But yeah, well, we assumed lots of things that aren't turning out to be the case.
I think that's crystal ball gazing in many respects, isn't it? But Andrew, I see your hand up. Mr. Smalls, please.
I think, you know, basically the assets and liabilities of all of the constituent authorities just become the assets and liabilities of the new authority. So any debts or assets just transfer over into the new unitary council on day one. Usual treasury management rules still apply in the intervening time, and there'll become a point where we start thinking increasingly about the handover and the legacy that we passport over to the new organisation, and whether there's any action we need to take ahead of that. But in broad terms, as I say, really, any assets or liabilities just become the assets and liabilities of the new council.
Thank you. I know it's one of those imponderables at the moment until we know exactly what's going to happen. And I recall being at Essex County Council when Thurrock and Southend were hived off as unitaries, and there were discussions then about exactly how it would happen. And we didn't have a clarity until fairly late in the day. Councillor Naylor. Yeah.
So the reason I ask is just when you were rightly describing the judgment that's made about whether to roll on or to call the debt in, presumably things mature or get rolled on during the whole period, and I just wondered how that will be treated, because you rightly say you base that on whether you need the money in or not. So presumably that, how do you consider that with the lens of reform coming?
I think Mr. Hartgrove answered that earlier. It's a decision for the politicians in charge of the authority at a particular time. So it'll be the administration that makes those decisions. Councillor Dundas.
Yeah, just briefly on the subject of LGR, and the amalgamating the assets and liabilities of potentially Colchester, Tendring and Braintree will be relatively simple, particularly in terms of an accounting treatment. However, dividing up the assets and liabilities of Essex County Council around the county might be slightly more complicated and controversial.
I think we'd all agree with you, Councillor Dundas. I recall, because I was in the unfortunate position of being leader of the council at Essex when Southend and Thurrock were hived off, and having those discussions with the treasurer behind closed doors. But this one's going to be much more complex than that one. Right. Any other questions or comments on that? Is there... Councillor Corey and Mr Small. Councillor Corey?
I haven't got any more to add at this point, Chair, because the answers have been given, I'd say. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And Andrew?
The same, I think, really, Chair. I think, it is the wicked issue, really, in terms of how do you disaggregate the county council, really, where does the debt go? What's it associated with? Where do the services sit? Where do the assets sit? This is what's going to take, most of the time, I think, really, issue, as has been said, aggregation of the districts into a single council is probably comparatively extremely easy. But the disaggregation of the county will be where most of the work is. Thank you.
And as Councillor Dundas muttered under his breath there, and the arguments. All right. So we've commented on, asked questions about the Q3 update, and we're just asked to note and pass comments for full council, which I think we have done. Thank you very much. Looking at the time, I can get through the Treasury Management Strategy, so we'll move on to 8.2. Back to you, Chris. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Item 8.2 then, this is the draft Treasury Management Strategy, which is included on pages 71 to 90 of your agenda this evening. Members will recall that, subject to some minor alterations published in December 2021, the preparation of an annual Treasury Management Strategy has been a set for requirement of the Treasury Management Code for many years now. And this report fulfills that requirement in Appendix A. In addition, in accordance with MHCLG's 2024 guidance, an updated MRP policy, which has already been mentioned this evening, is included Appendix B. It should be noted that whilst Treasury Management investments are included in the strategy, there remains further work to be done on service and commercial investments as part of the corporate landlord review and, of course, local government reform. And once clarity is achieved, it will enable the production of a more comprehensive investment strategy, which is embedded in the Treasury Management Strategy. Both borrowing and investing, of course, is taking place against the backdrop of relatively high interest rates, and some would argue normal, but relatively high compared to what we've been used to over the last decade or so. And there are strong indications, though, that interest rates have peaked, and rate reductions, which have already commenced, are anticipated to continue into the medium and long term. As covered in the previous agenda item, as of the 31st of December 24, the Council had 147.6 million in external borrowing, partially offset by 12.8 million in Treasury investments, and the position is summarised in page 88 of the report. In terms of borrowing then, as presented on page 74, the Council's capital financing requirement, which reflects the Council's underlying need to borrow, continues to rise, reflecting the needs of the capital programme, although it should be noted that estimated actual borrowing, even allowing for carrying a minimum of 20 million in investments, will remain below the CFR at all times, which is illustrated in particular by the chart at the bottom of page 75, which compares the Council's actual borrowing to its liability benchmark. This is the level at which actual external borrowing is projected to progress in the coming years, although consistently utilising its balance sheet resources, including accumulated reserves. The Council should consistently borrow below its CFR. Outstanding borrowing as of the 31st of December is presented in tables 4, 5 and 6, with table 4 showing the outstanding PWLB position as at the 31st of March. In fact, it's the same position as the Q3 report I've just presented. Finally, on borrowing, affordable borrowing limits have been calculated and are presented in table 7. Both the operational boundary and the authorised limit are key prudential indicators and have been calculated for 25-26 at 328. Sorry, I've written that down wrong. There's a typo somewhere in there. So, I'll have to look that up in a second, so I'll come back to that. And we'll report on performance against those limits at each quarter. In terms of investments, as previously reported to this committee, investment balances have purposely been reduced and used to repay existing debt or finance the capital programme without recourse to borrowing. A minimum investment balance of £20 million is the core strategy recommended to maintain liquidity. A full breakdown of the Treasury Management investments is presented in Table 8 on page 81, showing the 12.7/8 million that we've already talked about, and based on professional advice from Link, tables 9A and 9B on pages 82 and 83 respectively, propose to continue with a relatively cautious counterparty list which maintains flexibility for officers and eliminates riskier and more complex investments, which of course is being proportionate whilst of course, should I say, being proportionate to investment needs. And finally, on Treasury Management, section 7, pages 8 to 84 to 95, sets out the usual Treasury 84 and 85 sets out the usual Treasury Management prudential indicators against which we'll report back to this committee during the year ahead, as is established practice. I'm happy to take any questions, Chair, whilst I look up the authorised limit numbers that I couldn't find.
Thank you, Mr Hartgrove. And I'm sure Councillor Smith would agree with me that your indication that 4% of probably normal interest rates is probably about right, because I remember my first mortgage being 15%. And until 2008, they probably hovered in that neighbourhood of 4 to 7%, as I recall. But I'm sure Councillor Smith has got more professional experience of that than I ever had. I've got Councillor Smith, Sunnox and Dundas at the moment. Councillor Smith.
Thank you. Well, of course, Chair, my first mortgage was 5%, but then I had the benefit of working for a bank, didn't I? So that was a big advantage in those days. 5.1, the affordable limits. Am I correct, keeping on my banking thing, of thinking this is a bit like my overdraft? Effectively, that's the maximum that it's recommended that I can go up to. But just like any prudent individual, I wouldn't really encourage a customer to be up there at their overdraft limit all the time. So am I right in thinking that this 328 or 348, depending on whether you allow for the 20 million extra liquidity, is effectively what our overdraft limit is, to put it in layman's terms?
That's a very good analogy. I think that's pretty much what it is. So.
Thank you. But we're only actually borrowing 143 million or thereabouts at the moment. So we're way below our overdraft limit. Thank you. Oh, that's normally as someone, that sounds quite a good position to be in.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Councillor Sunnox.
Yes, pick up on exactly that point. Table 5.1 on page 80 suggests our affordable borrowing is miles above what we're doing now. So question 1, is it an effective control? It just isn't. I don't see how it limits anyone. The second thing is, we're borrowing 140 something million now, and we're going out to borrow another 147 million in the budget. Is it affordable? This is obviously some public sector rule here. If you go to the private sector, you go to the bank, you have to be able to show them the cash flow from which you will repay your loan. And that is what's affordable. If you look in the SIP for guidance, it says you've got to be able to show some cash flow with which to repay your loan. We have no cash flow. We have this huge structural deficit rising to 8.5 million over the next 5 years. There's nothing to repay the loan in there. And I just wonder which planet the public sector is coming on from to say that this sort of level of borrowing is affordable. It's just not. If you're going to be borrowing that much money, you need to be showing some cash flow to repay it from.
Mr. Hartgrove?
I think the budget shows that it's affordable going forward. It also there, and the medium-term financial forecast shows that there's a deficit that has to be addressed. I don't think there's any secret about that. So,
thank you. Councillor Sunix?
I'm just sort of flabbergasted. So let's be clear. The medium-term cash flow shows the interest on the loans, and the debt is probably, we haven't got an awful lot of debt to repay soon, but where is the idea, where is the hope that we're going to be able to generate the cash to repay it? If you go to a commercial bank, they'll say you've got to be able to show cash flow probably of 1.5 times the whole loan servicing cost, interest and repayments. That's the type of thing out in the commercial world you have to do. Somehow, public sector's got itself into this business where the PWLB lends you as much as you want, and it then and you then say that you've got all these borrowing limits, the capital financing requirement, and the other things that are way above what you're going to have, you actually need, and then you have deficits forecast all over the place. Our deficit is twice our neighbour's deficit, okay? Our capital budget is 10 times the combined budget of our neighbours. Our borrowing is higher than our neighbours, our reserves is lower than our neighbours. And yet we're still saying that this is affordable. It's from another planet.
Thank you, Councillor Sunix. At this point, I'm going to bring Mr. Smalls in, and then Councillor Corey. Andrew?
Thank you, Chair. I mean, it's some, to some extent, I think these are the conversations we've been having probably for the last few months, possibly years, really. The medium-term financial forecast includes the impacts of the capital programme and borrowing associated with that, and that's been partly a part of the reason that part of the explanation for the resulting deficit. So the resulting deficit becomes a target that the administration and the council has to consider in terms of its potential financial planning framework, really. But because it's a future forecast, if the council can't find a way of delivering the balanced budget that it needs, then it will have to adjust its capital programme spending ambitions, really. If it can't afford it, won't be able to include it within future capital programme plans. So the capital programme will either have to be revised down, or the administration's plans for delivering savings or additional income or tax rises will have to be adjusted accordingly. The whole thing is in a kind of harmony, really. What the medium-term financial forecast sets out at this point in time is the target that the administration and the council needs to work to. Doesn't necessarily set out all of the answers at this point in time, but it does set out the scale of the challenge that the organisation needs to address. And because it's a rolling forecast, we need to look forward next year about success or ambition and whether it's deliverable or not. And if it's not, we'll have to change our plans accordingly. And I think that's the same as any business does, really. It looks into the future, sets out its ambition, and then comes up with a plan to try and deliver it. If it can't deliver it, it'll have to scale back its ambition. And this is why you have a medium-term financial forecast, because it's a rolling plan that can be adjusted according to circumstances. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Corey,
Thank you. Useful to follow Andrew's comments there. I think it's absolutely clear that over the last 10 years that I've been involved in putting together a budget or leading the council, we have been faced with deficits every single year, and we have addressed them every single year. So if you had totaled up where we were back in 2015 to now, we'd probably have a deficit of 100 million if we didn't deal with it. But we have dealt with it. So we will deal with it again as we face it. Now, Andrew talks about how you could balance that, and that will be looking at the capital programme. That will be at the end of the HRA review, looking at how we deal with the balance of building homes, the balance of repairing and the costs, and some of the issues you discussed earlier with the HRA colleagues, the housing colleagues. So we will probably likely do both, reduce the capital programme expenditure on the HRA. That is likely to happen. We have made some tweaks already for this year's budget as an interim piece of work, but we will also have to face the deficit by looking at further savings, further expansion of Fit for the Future, looking at other ways that we generate income or that we use the business rates that we get in within the base budget. So there's a number of different ways that we'll have to tackle that. But I want to make clear to those of the public to try and understand this. We as a council do have income. We have council tax, we have business rates, and importantly, we have council housing rents that come in. We also then have assets, and we have the housing stock that we have. A lot of the borrowing you'll see is to do with the HRA account, which is the housing revenue account. It's like having a mortgage on 6,000 properties. So we do have an asset there. We have a mortgage. We kind of have a deposit almost, and we own stock. So for me, it's not beyond the realms of possibility that we can pay this money back. We can invest money to a logical amount. As Councillor Smith says, we're not going anywhere near what we can borrow, but we will be looking at finding that balance between investment and savings. And we will do that facing the deficits we have next year. We'll have to make that decision, and that will come at the end of spring, early summer, when the HRA review has finished. But I just wanted to say we have the assets, we have the rent coming in, it is all payable, and we have the borrowing forecasted into the medium-term financial forecast. That is manageable at this point, but we may need to work, as I said, in a balance between what we do invest in, how we reduce the programme down, and how we find other ways to make savings. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Corey. I'm going to bring Councillor Sunnox in one more time. Councillor Sunnox.
Yes. At what point do we adjust our capital programme? I mean, we just heard that it's not beyond the realms of possibility that we can pay back our debt. That seems an amazing. I think that's about right, actually, Councillor Corey. It isn't beyond the realms of possibility that we can pay it back if we get lucky, as we have in the past. It's not beyond the realms of possibility, but to say that's affordable is extraordinary. And the question is, at what point do we trim our capital programme? Every year we continue capital spending at the sort of levels that we're projecting, not necessarily the levels we're achieving, but the sort of levels we're projecting. Every year we do that, we're piling on the interest and the MRP, and we can't undo it. It's piling on. There's no income coming in from that extra capital expenditure, or no profitable income coming in. And at what point do we actually say, we've got to call a halt to this. We've got to start reviewing our capital programme as we were told to 2 years ago and get the thing back under control. Oh, and one other statistic. I look back, we're told, oh, well, we've always had deficits and all councils have deficits. So I've had a look back at 2023, the first year here in the council, the budget that we did in February 2023. That showed a year 5 deficit of 1.8 million, a big figure. But it's ballooned from 1.8 million to 8.5 million now. Where does it have to go? Where does that figure have to go before we say, hey, wait a minute, it's worse than, it's beyond the possibility that we'll be able to repay it?
Right, thank you. Anna, you want to come in, then I'm going to bring Councillor Corey back and wrap this one up before we break. Anna?
I'm coming in now because we're talking about something for the future as opposed to the past, which is Andrew and Chris. So yes, Councillor Sunnex, it's something that I am very familiar with in capital programs. I'm in terms of past roles that I've done. So one of the things, and I know that Andrew and Chris have done a lot of work on the capital program. I'm very confident that that it's fully integrated into the revenue program, into the budget, which is exactly what Andrew was saying, because a lot of other councils that have fallen over, which shall remain nameless and don't even sit within the county of Essex, that have fallen over because they haven't incorporated their MRP and borrowing costs within their revenue budget and into the budget, and it was completely unaffordable. That is not the case here. One of the reasons I do want to look at the capital program as one of the key things I'm going to do when we have our capital accountant starting next week is because we shouldn't only look at the capital program for affordability, that is a key criteria, but also deliverability. And that is something that we are not great on. Many local authorities over optimistic in terms of the deliverability. And so we need to find that balance between the two. And what that will do is we need to take a serious look at that, and we need to either remove some things that haven't commenced in the capital program, that it's right to do so, that are going to contribute to borrowing MRP costs in the future, or we spread them over a longer period of time. So, and therefore making them more affordable. So it's one of the first things on my list that I want to do. And in terms of the deficit question, it also goes back to the fact that government grant funding was very, very different about over a decade ago, probably 12 years ago, and it's a very different beast now. So we have to find other ways of delivering what we say we deliver as in terms of our residents and what our priorities are as a council.
Thank you, Anna. Councillor Corey.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to say, as Anna did allude to then, we have carried out a review of the capital programme and we have reduced some of the capital programme spending. We are going in that direction in terms of looking at what we can and can't afford. So we are addressing what is in front of us. We're addressing the fact the economy remains flat and it's not helping in terms of some of the assets that we have, in terms of costs of inflation over the last 10 years compared to what we've got in terms of rents in council homes or what we've got in terms of government grants, means that we are lagging behind. We still need to invest in certain assets in terms of repairs and upkeep, but we also are looking at our assets and saying, right, these are now liabilities that we will dispose of. And that's why we've got the corporate landlord policy in place, and we are working bit by bit to address how we can bring in income through disposals, reduce liability. Also, in some cases where there's borrowing against assets, we can reduce MRP as well. So we have carried out the capital programme review before. We will continue to do that. I think Chris has mentioned that's a rolling, it needs to be a rolling programme. The HRA review is going to finish, as I say, at the end of spring, so we'll be able to address more of that there. And the corporate landlord policy will enable us to be even more flexible to use our assets in the best way, whether that be disposal, whether that be to release in a different way. We will do everything we can to flexibly make sure we are paying less out and getting more in.
Thank you, Councillor Corey. And I just remind members that, of course, we will get our quarterly update where we will be able to interrogate how things are progressing under the next budget. Councillor Dundas, I see your hand up. Councillor Dundas and Councillor Naylor, and then I'm going to Councillor Smith, and I'm going to draw this to
I'm going to be brief and perhaps help with the wrapping up. I wasn't going to say this, but I think just to continue the analogy which Councillor Smith started, as I see it, that is we have been approved for a mortgage for a certain amount, which is detailed in here. However, our MTFF shows that if we borrow what we're planning to borrow, then just because we can borrow it, that will mean our mortgage and living costs, outgoings, are more than our income. That's what the MTFF says. So to address that, we have two choices. Either we've got to up our income, we've got to tax more, we've got to find some money from somewhere, or we've got to cancel the holidays. They are the two options we've got. But what it does, the MTFF says, that structural deficit says that we cannot afford on our current income what we're planning to borrow. But I would like to actually make a recommendation, actually, under our recommended decisions. We've got 2.2, and it goes back to what Councillor Sunnock said, where it says to consider and recommend for approval by full Cabinet the draft MRP statement. I think we should add that it should include the MRP schedule. I think what this conversation bears out is that it is important all councillors, if they wish to look at it, are aware of what our projects, past, present and future, are actually costing in MRP and how much it is actually coming directly off the revenue budget, which of course affects what we can spend directly on services. We know it exists, I've got it, for which thank you very much. I don't think there's anything confidential in it, because if you want to find out what a capital programme costs, just look on CMIS and go back to the capital budget from 10 years ago. It's pretty obvious it's there. Anybody who wants to find out can. But I think it's useful. Certainly the first time I saw it, I found it very useful, and it was quite an eye-opener, and I think all 51 councillors should have the opportunity to find it easily. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll come back to that when we get to the recommendations. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask the incoming Section 151 officer. I'd like to pick up on an interesting point you made there as one of your priorities for your work programme. You mentioned you were going to be in capital programme review, and are you able to give an indication at this point when you'll have something to report back to this committee and when you expect that work to be concluded? Thank you.
My first question is going to be when the next committee is. I don't know off the top of my head. I've got an incoming capital accountant that starts on Monday, and he's very technical. So my priority is to look at to give myself assurance as the incoming Section 151, and also to Pam as the Chief Executive, that our program is affordable, is fully integrated, and is deliverable. And I do harp on the deliverability of a capital program. It is, we are in a no different position than many other local authorities. It doesn't make it right, but our slippage levels are high, and there is a number of things we can do to bring them back in line and make it realistic, because this is the pledge we make to our residents when we set the council tax, that we are going to deliver a capital program of a certain magnitude, and we should be doing as we say and making it realistic. The last thing I want to do is to report to you on a quarterly basis that we have huge slippages, and I'm not reporting something that's realistic. My view of constantly looking at and reviewing the capital program is to give an element of realism as to the deliverability. The other thing you do is put a whole load of capital costs into your revenue budget that you're having to either find savings for or cut services or something to deliver a program that's never going to be delivered. So it doesn't make sense to do that. So I'm not saying that what Andrew and Chris have done is incorrect by any stretch of the imagination. It's to give myself assurances and give some level of deliverability that's realistic to the program. So I would say by the next committee, but I don't know when the next committee is. So March. Maybe not March.
Maybe not the next one. Chris, did you want to come in quickly?
Sorry, Chair, can I just pick up on a point around the transparency of MRP charges and draw attention to page 49 of tomorrow night's budget report. So on page 49, it sets out the MRP budget, which is cost centre reference 3921 for the record, and there's a draft budget proposal in there of £2,525,300, which is slightly lower than last year's budget, which was 2,885,100.
Thank you. All right, I've got Councillor Smith, then Councillor Dundas.
Thank you. I must admit, I'm getting rather concerned at some of the language that's being used, particularly by Councillor Sunnock, referring to us as being lucky. If something keeps happening time after time after time, year after year, we meet the savings targets, we achieve the budgets, we balance them, and that's been happening year after year after year. I don't think that's luck. I think that's down to the hard work of the various administrations, including the one led by Councillor Dundas, in getting it right, and our officers putting the work in to ensure that our programmes are delivered. So I wasn't very happy about your using the word luck. I think it's down to hard work and effort. And Councillor Dundas, to carry on the banking example, yes, if you blow your overdraft on an expensive holiday or a bit of gambling, that's not going to help. But if you're using the overdraft to invest in assets, maybe to improve your property or what have you, you might be able to save some costs. And if you're improving your assets, when you sell that asset in the future, it's worth more. And that's exactly what this council is doing, and with its strategy for supporting growth, rather than just shutting up shop and shutting down the borough, or sorry, the city.
Right, thank you all. I'm just going to remind committee members, before I take the final comment this evening, that there is a full budget meeting of the whole council tomorrow evening. So let's not rehearse all of those discussions, debates here. This is about looking at our treasury management strategy. Councillor Dundas.
Thank you. Yeah, just on that, you're right. But obviously, if you overborrow, you might have the asset sitting there. You've got the house sitting there. But if your mortgage is going out more than your income, you are going to go down to Aldi one evening, and your debit card will not work. But on the MRP schedule, Mr. Hargrave's absolutely right. It is in there, and actually, I have to compliment actually, because I think the last two budgets, the clarity of what we're actually spending on MRP and capital financing costs has improved a lot, because the figures are actually specifically there in the budget. The reason I think it's worth all councillors seeing the MRP schedule is that the MRP schedule doesn't just contain what's happening now, it predicts the next 5 years. In other words, it tells you what forthcoming capital projects are going to cost in terms of MRP and the future impact on the revenue budget. If potentially difficult decisions are going to will be required over the capital budget, in other words, what we put in and what we take out and what we don't do, and to make that decision and make that judgment, councillors need to know what each project is going to cost in terms of MRP, and the MRP schedule does give a good indication on that. So I think it's still very useful to have. And why not?
Thank you. No, and I've had a quick chat with Richard Block, and I'm just going to ask Andrew to comment, because I trust Andrew as our Section 151 officer to steer us in the right direction. If there's any reason why we shouldn't include the MRP schedule, I think based on what Chris has already said to us, Andrew, I have a good indication of what your answer is likely to be. But you're our Section 151 officer, so I'm just going to ask you, please, to remark on the proposed amendment that Councillor Dundas is putting forward.
It's a matter of record. I think, if members want to see the detail, then they're able to see the detail as far as I'm concerned, and happy for it to be shared. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So I'm proposing that we close this discussion and debate, and we move on to the recommended decision. So 2.1. Consider and recommend for full approval by full council the draft Treasury Management Strategy. All those in agreement? I think that's unanimous. Thank you. 2.2, with the amended addition of the MRP schedule also going to for approval to full council with the MRP statement for 25-26. Can I have a show of hands on that one, please? That's unanimous as well, Mr. Evans. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you to Chris and Andrew for your contributions this evening, and Anna as well. I think at this point, as far as I'm aware, we can say exit stage left, if you wish. Welcome to stay, but I don't think there's anything else we need your input for. So thank you very much. Looking at the time, it's 2 minutes to 1:45, so what I'm going to propose is that we're back here to restart at 7:55, please, sharpish. Thank you very much. Welcome back to the Governance and Audit Committee of 25th of February. We've just had a brief break and we'll start again on item 8(3). This is a verbal update from the Council's Chief Operating Officer with regard to the statement of accounts that follows from our discussion at the last meeting around advice and guidance and what and wherefore. Mr. Block, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, committee members. In line with the previous discussions we've had about this, I've been having weekly meetings with Hannah Lincoln, the lead auditor on our external audit, and also keeping in regular contact with Emma Larkham. Emma emailed myself and colleagues a few days ago now to give an update from her perspective. And as far as she's concerned, they're confident they'll be able to achieve a sign-off for the March committee, which is what we've been talking about, and hope to provide a report in the coming weeks. There are some areas that they're looking into in a bit more depth, and I think the predicament that Hannah relayed to me earlier is that this is an audit that's looking back quite a way still, so 23-24, and particularly the run-up to the creation of that budget. So there's a certain amount of kind of looking back in time, and quite a lot has happened since then, and they're trying to kind of just work through how things might have been then to how they are now, and work that through in terms of the audit. But to give you a flavour of the areas that Emma's fed back on, in terms of the financial statement audit, they will be issuing a full disclaimer. I know this came up in our private session a couple of weeks ago, but they've concluded nearly all of their walkthroughs now, with just one pending. They've got various things they need to do now to be able to finalise, but have found nothing concerning today around what they will do with the financial statements, excepting it will be a full disclaimer. In terms of the value for money element, all the inquiry sessions have been completed, and there is some additional work for them to do in terms of considering what they've actually identified. The areas that they're, just to give you a flavour of the areas that they're really kind of looking at over the next couple of weeks: capacity and capability of technical roles, finance and assets, risk management, including fraud risks, procurement and contract management, which was something that's been raised previously by internal audit, and assets and estates, bearing in mind where we were in the run-up to the 23-24 budget and the report we literally just had them from SITFA about revising how we manage our estates, Northern Gateway, and budget setting and cost savings. Like I say, what the predicament they're in is trying to work back to how things were then to what's happened since. But that's the work they're actually doing over the coming couple of weeks. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Comments, anyone? Anna?
I just wanted to add a comment about moving forward. I know we're focusing on 23-24, but I'm also, in my mind, looking at 24-25. I have got a draft timetable for 24-25, and one of the key elements that I have asked to be included in there, and we need to go through that in detail, is a regular meeting with myself and the audit director at my level, but also at the audit manager level moving forward. I have already recruited a couple of key posts in the team, and I've got more interviews tomorrow to interview what I'm calling a head of corporate finance or a chief accountant, which is the most technical person in finance, because for this very reason, this is my, I would like to say number one priority, but then I have a lot of number one priorities. So the first thing that Richard talked about was the capacity and capability within the finance team on a technical basis, and I recognise that is one of our key gaps. So if I had to draw up a risk register right now, I would tell you that that's my number one risk, and I'm addressing that. So I've appointed an interim deputy director of finance, and he starts on Monday, and we're interviewing for the chief accountant tomorrow and Thursday. So by the end of the week, I would have filled two quite technical roles, and also capital accountant, a very technical capital accountant. So I know that that's a problem for us, and I'm addressing it. And my very first thing I'm going to ask for when we have a chief accountant start is going over the timetable and absolutely giving it all to get to a draft set of accounts for the end of June. And that's going to be one of my very first priorities when I take over.
Thank you. I know, members, we were all, I think it's fair to say, unanimously exercised by the remarks that we heard from our external auditors. We made that quite clear to senior officers. I think from my perspective, it's good to hear that they've been taken as serious and they are being addressed as quickly as they possibly can be, given the circumstances that we were made aware of regarding some staff resource shortages. Are there any comments or any questions that anybody wants to raise? Councillor Kelly.
Thank you. Your recent hire, your interim hire, how long is the contract for on that one?
Because I'm interim, Paul is also interim, so these hires are interim for 6 months, and that's indicative. It's a standard thing, but I'm not making any permanent hires at this point in time, and I can't do because my role isn't permanent, and we have LGR, so it's quite complicated. But my priority is to create the capacity and the capability, the technical side within the team that's seriously lacking, and that's where the investment in finance absolutely has to be if we want to get ourselves to a place where we don't have a disclaimed set of accounts going into LGR, and that is a very clear priority of mine.
Thank you. I think that's a really positive sentiment. Thank you, Anne. Did I see anyone else's hand? Councillor Summit.
Yes, there's a sense of urgency and determination in your voice that I really like, and I'm really pleased you're recruiting technical accountants. That's exactly what we need. Could I just urge that you make sure when people come on board, they have their eyes completely open as to where we are, not where we want to be. There's nothing more demoralising than the member of staff going into a job and finding it's worse than he'd thought it was, and he then has to take responsibility for explaining to everyone for distributing bad news. Get behind them, get underneath the problem, and then they can enjoy solving it, and then we can have some really positive discussions as we solve them going forward. But there is, we are really at low water springs at the moment.
Thank you for that remark, Councillor Sunnox. And she might, I would just add. Right, Councillor Kelly?
Sorry, I hadn't quite finished. So on the interim, the interim posts that you're creating, the actual contracts themselves, are they, can they roll over, or are they fixed term? That's it, 6 months done.
No, as with all these contracts, they can be shortened or lengthened as required. So we give I'm a little bit different, but with the contract with Paul, who's my deputy, we have to give, is that a month's notice? I think it's a month's notice as an interim. We have to give a month's notice, or it might be less, sorry. But we have a lot of flexibility is what I'm trying to say. So if the person isn't working out, or if it's not working out for them or for us, or we want to extend them, we have perfect flexibility.
All right, Councillor Kelly. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. I'm finding this refreshing, this discussion. So just on that point though, just picking up on that point, it's sort of also the flip side of that is there could be some fragility, because naturally people who are interim could choose to leave quite quickly at a time that's not good for the authority. and they're all being recruited now, naturally, so the sort of the dropping off point is the same. I don't know if I've expressed myself correctly, but I'm just feeling, you know, what thinking has been done around that fragility, please.
It's tricky. I've done interim. I've done a combination of interim and permanent myself, so I know that. I understand what you're saying, and it's up to me to manage that. And if I can't chain people to the desk, and if they want to go, they go. I need to make sure there's a proper handover. In fact, on Monday, Chris and Paul will be talking about handover and transition plans and all of that, and I've already put that in place. I can't say that enough. It's difficult to recruit people here. We talked about this last time. So I have to do whatever I can to get the right skill set in to get us to a better place in the accounts, and that's what I have done. But if a member of the team then decide that it's not for them or vice versa, then I have to find an alternative and make sure I get the right skill set in. And I'm never the type of person that will let someone walk out the door without doing a proper handover of some description or another. So that's up to me to manage that situation.
Thank you. Richard?
Yeah, if I could just add as well. Obviously, you know, the alternative to interim is permanent, and with permanent, it takes longer, it's fair to say, to get people in. So there is that balance as well. And all I would say is it's not just all on Anna in terms of keeping these staff. It's a team effort across the organisation, across members as well, that we make these people as welcome as possible. Thank you.
Yep, valid points. Thank you. Right, I think that's all the indications I have. So we were just asked to note the update, and I think we've done that in spades. So I'm going to move us on to 8.4, the internal audit plan. Hayley?
Thank you, Chair. So tonight in front of you, you've got the report for our internal audit strategy for the next 3 years, as well as the detailed plan for next year, 25-26. Our contract for internal audit with our supplier has just been out to tender, and that's due to be agreed, hopefully, by Cabinet in the next week or so. I don't think there's any issues with that, and hopefully they will carry on with that supply. But even if it wasn't agreed, it's still the plan that we would go with next year. So the strategy sets out the 3 years and the areas of coverage on a rolling basis over those 3 years. And then obviously we report to you every year the individual plan we're proposing to carry out. There are some audits that are carried out every year, and they are the key financial ones and the ones that give assurance to our external auditors and for yourselves in terms of making sure that we have the proper controls in place. The plan is for 300 days a year, which includes 26 days for follow-ups and management and reporting. And we also carry out some auditing for Colchester Commercial Holdings Limited, so for the Amphora companies. Now, what you've been used to in the past is we have a set number of days that we provide to Amphora to decide on where they are going to have their audits carried out. Now, it's a very small number of days out of our total plan, and would probably allow them 1 or 2 audits of their choosing. The key areas of their services, such as helpline, fibre and events, are included in the council's plan, so we have those assurances. But we do give them these extra days, and I've been talking to Simon, the Managing Director of CCHL, in terms of how we're going to carry out those audits. And what they're actually going to do is carry out some of their own internal auditing. So they are training up their staff to audit some of their functions. And the days that we provide as part of the contract with TIA will actually be going in and verifying the audit work that they've undertaken and producing a management audit, ensuring that their system of internal control is acceptable and providing that assurance back to yourselves. So it's a slightly different way of auditing for CCHL. However, I think it's a more robust way of auditing. So we'll actually have more coverage because they'll be providing some of that themselves, with an external verification by TIA. Colchester Borough Homes, we don't manage their audit contract, but they are audited by the same auditors and they are carrying on their arrangement with TIA the same as we are. So it's whether you have any questions, and obviously what I would like you to do is make sure that the areas set out in the strategy and for the plan next year will provide you with the assurance that you need to comply with your requirements under the terms of the Governance and Audit Committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Hayley. I think before I bring other members in, I'll just say that we had a very productive, positive meeting prior to the start of this evening's committee meeting with representatives from TIA. There were one or two things that we were suggesting that they seemed to be happy to take forward. We're mindful of that elephant in the room, local government reorganisation, so we've suggested that we want them to have that as an overarching theme with everything that they're doing and to bring us back anything that they feel is appropriate. A couple of other things that came out of that, one was around the two big external activities that we oversee, CCHL and CBH. In particular, CCHL, I think we recognise, I think there are 12 days that are allocated. And one of the things we were talking with TIA about was them bringing to us some of their ideas rather than just bringing them to you, so that we could sense check before they start doing their internal audits. I don't think we want to micromanage, but there are one or two areas that we probably just want to ensure are going in the direction that we'd like to see in terms of internal audit. The other one that came up, which you will have heard around the table previously, on more than one occasion, is around project management. So I think that's just a brief overview. I'm sure one or two other members might remind us of anything else that we were suggesting we'd like to task them with. And TIA were indicating that they were more than happy to come and have a private session with us again in the not too distant future. Over to members. Councillor Sunnox and Councillor Smith.
Yes. It was a much more positive feedback from TIA than we've had from other places. And just to add to what Chris has said, they said they would be happy to, we asked them whether they would backfill any of the things that we're particularly concerned about by the absence of an external audit. And, you know, we're sitting here without an external audit for some years. We're not going to have it for a couple more years. KPMG sit there just saying, when we ask them, can we have any assurance on these subjects? They just say, no. I wonder whether we could get TIA to give us some comfort on focused areas that are of concern. Because there are real risks and real concerns we've got. We can see all these other things, and it's really good that they're looking at procurement and everything else. But there's real risks, and particularly on the project risk register and around that. I just wonder whether we could, I'm sure they want some money for it, whether we could expand their role or divert some of their days. Have they got the skills to do it? I don't really know. But I asked the question, perhaps a wider question, how can we get assurance on the things that are worrying us about the accounts? And I've listed them many times. I won't do it again here.
Thank you, Councillor Sunnox. Hayley, I'm not sure you're able to respond fully, but I'll leave you in your inimitable way with your skills to do so.
Thank you, Chair. I think I can cover some of it in terms of we have ample opportunity to buy additional auditing work from TIA over and above our contract. And as part of the tender, we actually specify rates. So we know exactly how much we would pay for those and what areas that they can cover. Their skill set is immense in terms of they are a very large organisation. So specialist areas are not a problem for them. What we would have to do is work through a programme of areas of concern. I think that's a conversation that you probably want to have with executive and with the senior leadership board in terms of the areas of concern. And then I can take that away to Chair to discuss where we can incorporate that into our programming that we already have. So we may be able to move some of our audits around, and we may be able to change some of our days, so not have to buy too many additional ones. And that's what happens with our plan, which is why we bring it back to you on an annual basis. So we can actually say, that area of auditing isn't one that's important to us at the moment. We want to look at something else, and we do swap during the year for operational reasons. So, for example, we might have an area we've got in the plan, but a contract is due for renewal. So it's not worth carrying out the audit at that point in time. It's better to do it once the contract has been placed. So we have all of that flexibility, but I think it's a conversation that's probably above me in terms of where those areas are and what we want to look at. But I'll certainly have those conversations.
Thank you. You want to come back quickly?
Yes. I can see that I've asked the wrong person. But can we make sure that question gets on the agenda? How can we get assurance for those things that are worrying us about the accounts? Because it's not just that we haven't ticked the box of the audit, it's actually that we think there are things wrong with the accounts. We need to look at them.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Sunnucks. I'm going to bring Richard Block in at this point, but I think I'd just refer you and members of the committee to the update that we had in the last item, where we were given an indication that things are progressing now with KPMG. But
we're still looking at, sorry, Chair, we're still looking at another couple of years of completely disclaimed audit reports.
Yeah.
And they're sitting there saying they're looking at things, they haven't found anything wrong, but, you know, we want something from someone telling us it's right.
Okay, let me bring Richard in and then David. Richard, you want? Defer to David. David.
To save your time on the precursor to another very long evening, we should want to do this, and why don't we give Hayley, who knows both the area and the people well, and informed by you, Chair, and your earlier discussions, your sense of the committee, this has to work for the organisation as well, right? That's the way of this thing. But there is a corporate gap which none of us will be comfortable about, to which you keep referring, William. We all want to have the best assurance we can. This gives some flexibility and a charge to Haley's senior leadership team, informed by the chair if you need it. You know, I say we will do something here because it's in our collective interest we do so.
Thank you. Richard?
Yeah, just to echo, if we can capture, I mean, I think we understand the areas that you're concerned about, but I'd be interested in wider areas as well. Not, you know, it's a whole committee, so if there's other areas that people would like to, for the audits to be shaped, then absolutely feed it in. Hayley comes to senior board and we have a discussion about the plan. It needs to reflect the audit committee's desires as well.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Smith and Councillor Kelly. Councillor Smith?
Thank you. I can see the reasons for concerns over the project plan. I must admit, I think the accounts are a situation that an internal audit is not going to be able to do anything at all with, apart from checking that the numbers added up, and I think that was probably done. Moving on to the report in front of us, I noticed there were some sections that haven't got any ticks in at all, such as, members' allowances. Why is that?
It's because we have a limited number of days, so we have to use our resources in the way that would give us the most benefit. So we've identified areas that might be in the audit universe, but because we only have 300 days a year, we can't include everything. But we've included the detail there so you can see what's not being covered in terms of what's being left out. We're not saying they're not important, but they are areas that are quite well managed. And if I go for members' allowances, as you know, there's a very robust process we go through in terms of checking the allowances, complying with national regulations, and also when it comes to the increases in allowances, it's in line with the pay award that's given to officers. So in some respects, it's very set about what allowance you have. And as I say, there is an external verification of that about every 3 years.
Could I suggest, where we haven't got something planned, if we could have the date of the last time and the level of assurance it was given, I think that would indicate to us that, yes, it was checked a year ago and it was absolutely fine. We don't need to see it in the plan. But if it hadn't been checked for 10 years, we might take a different view on it.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. I think that's an eminent suggestion. Councillor Kelly.
This might be a bit too specific. I was looking at the allocation, and I'm noting that you've said there's a limit to the number of days. I see that you've got, on the anti-fraud one, you've got it every year, which I think is reasonable. But I saw that on your cybersecurity one, and particularly your disaster recovery one, you've only got them once each. And notably, the disaster recovery one isn't until the last year on the thing. And I just want to flag that I think that's not really good enough. I think the disaster recovery one should be every year. I realise you might have to lose days somewhere else, but that's critically important. And the cybersecurity one, threats evolve weekly, monthly. I work in this sector, I know how quickly it does it. So I think that should ideally be every year as well. I realise that may not be possible, but for me to see that, and I don't think that's enough, basically. Thank you.
I'll definitely take that point away. With cybersecurity, it's literally just been done and it had a reasonable assurance. So we're comfortable where we are at that point in time. Disaster recovery as well has been recently done, and that'll be reported to you in the annual report that comes in June, so the year-end report. In terms of doing it annually, it is that risk assessment of what do we need to do on an annual basis and what can be cyclical. But I'll definitely take the comments away, and I'll have that conversation with the audit manager as well in terms of their view from their understanding of how audits are taking place in other organisations, of where those risks are. And what I would say with TIRI is they are very good. So if they notice that there is a trend in other areas when they're doing auditing, they will flag that with us, and that comes in their 6 monthly reports to you as well. There's a bit of a summary at the end about trends, etc. So you can always use that piece of information to then form any idea or opinion that you have in terms of changing audits for the remainder of that year or for the next year. But I'll definitely take those points away.
Thank you. And I do recall from our conversation prior to the meeting that there was an indication about trends. We could use those trends to recommend changes to the internal audit when we get the half-year report. Any other comments or remarks? I'm not seeing any. So recommended decision is 2.1. Committee asked to consider the overall audit strategy attached to Appendix A to ensure that it reflects the key areas of assurance required to enable the committee to comply with its core functions. Not only have we done that, but we've also suggested a few small amendments to it and how we want to interact with the internal auditors going forward. And 2.2, agree the detailed internal audit plan for 25-26 with the possible exceptions of those that Hayley's going to take away and reconsider based on the comments that have been made around the table this evening. All agreed? Yep, thank you. That moves us on to item 8.5, and the Hayley McGrath show continues.
I'm so sorry about that, Chair. I try not to do it too often. So the report in front of you is the 6 monthly report for risk management, and it covers the period from the 1st of April to the 30th of September, which does feel like a little while ago now. So it covers the activity undertaken during that period. And it also sets out for you the current strategic risk register in terms of the key risks at this point in time. That's not from September. That's been recently updated by Senior Leadership Board, and I'll go into a bit of detail about some of those updates. And also, I want to talk about the project risk register side, because I know that's a very key area for the committee. And I was hoping to be able to bring you a report to this meeting that sets out the key project risks. We have had a recent change of management in the project management office, and they are reviewing the system that's being used for capturing those risks. At the moment, it's felt that the information is not in a format that would be suitable for reporting to you, but I am working on that. And my hope is that for the next meeting, possibly not for the March one, but definitely for the start of the new municipal year, we'll be able to bring you that project report in a format that gives you the information that you're looking for and also the assurances, or not as the case may be, in terms of how those projects are being managed. But I do accept from the previous report in terms of looking at the auditing side for projects, we'll incorporate that into the process as well, so to give you more of a robust overview. So I just want to briefly touch on the work undertaken during that 6-month period. A lot of the work in that time was actually about strengthening the governance arrangements, especially the shareholder responsibilities with this committee in terms of CCHL and with Colchester Borough Homes. You may recall the processes we've been going through, reviewing the governance and audit requirements and the functions of the committee and updating those details. I have been working quite closely, especially with CCHL, looking at their governance arrangements and their risk processes. So, as I say, we've been looking at the SITFA requirements, making sure that the committee complies with those, and following on from the last meeting, the risk management process has been revised, updated and agreed by full council. So looking at the strategic risk register, it has been updated recently, and I think it's fair to say that there have been a few changes that have been made, not many, and I just want to run through those quickly. The risk A, we felt that at this point in time, the wording of risk A was probably quite dated. So it refers to COVID and the pandemic, etc. It's now been 5 years. The impact of that is still being felt, but not in such the same way. So risk A has evolved, which means it's been removed from the register and it has been replaced with a new risk. So rather than updating the wording, which gets a bit confusing, I've taken that original risk out and replaced it with a new one. And that's the scale and uncertainty of central government's devolution and LGR proposals comes at a time when the organisational resilience is already low. So it's a reflection of the risks that we had in risk A in terms of organisational resilience, but actually the drivers of that now are changing and very significantly and very quickly. So we wanted to recognise the fact, the impact that the processes of devolution and local government reorganisation are having on the organisation already. The probability for risk I has the increasing reliance on IT to continue normal business, leaves the council vulnerable, has increased. So it is that recognition of the importance of our IT systems and our vulnerabilities relating to them. And the other risks have remained the same. Now, in terms of the devolution and local government reorganisation, obviously that new risk recognises the impact of that. However, it's not a comprehensive risk relating to devolution and local government reorganisation. What we are doing is creating a complete risk register for those changes as we go forward, because there are many. It's a conversation I'm having with the Senior Leadership Board later on this week in terms of looking at those risks and trying to look at those areas where we as an organisation will have impacts and how we are going to manage those in that 2-year period, 2 to 3 years of what's coming. We're also obviously working with our intended partners in terms of looking at a shared risk register. But what I'm working on with SLB is what the impact is to Colchester specifically, and feeding into obviously the shared one that we have with our partners as we go forward, and we think that's appropriate. So the risks are set out obviously in the risk register, and you can see that we've actually got 2 very high risks still outstanding now in terms of the concerns we have about devolution and local government reorganisation and the IT issues. Everything else with the mitigating actions has been reduced down, and that's set out in the matrix for you as well, so you can see where they sit on that chart before we have mitigating actions and afterwards. What I would say is there's been a lot of work in the last 6 months looking at some of our risk management processes. I've been working with SLB and we've been looking at risk appetite, etc. And that'll be reported to you in your annual report in July. And I'm open to any questions.
Thank you. I would just remark, picking up on Councillor Kelly's earlier contribution, that we have two very high priorities of risk, and where they're very high, that it probably suggests that that's where some of our internal audit time and effort and resourcing should be directed. Questions, comments? Councillor Dundas.
Yeah, very briefly. I think you've kind of answered my question really, Hayley. I'm very pleased to hear you saying that you're going to set up a specific risk register around LGR, because it demonstrates that how quickly this moves, because this is dated January the 7th. And it's difficult, isn't it? There was obviously a risk around the effects of LGR. I'm not sure we can really say that LGR is a risk. It's a known fact, actually. So things have moved on very rapidly. And one of the things, I think we discussed it in the meeting earlier with the internal auditors, we have two sections in here of high risk. One is around LGR, and the other one is around workforce wellbeing. And I think they are very linked, because I think that there is a potential risk around morale of staff, morale of councillors for that matter, and also potentially losing key staff at a very key time. And I'm sure when we start to see the LGR specific risk, that's going to feature quite heavily. And going back to the earlier conversation over the finances, I think we do have to note that the MTFF and balanced budget, as Councillor Sunnox has spoken about a lot, is still then there as a very high risk. And that has to be acknowledged by everybody. But yeah, thank you for that. It's fully support you in your work.
Thank you. Come back.
Yeah, just in terms of the workforce wellbeing and councillors, that's already been identified. That's already in my draft hit list of risks that I've got. It's a very, very basic list at the moment, just of those key points. And for us, as opposed to it being the risk of LGR, it's the impacts and what that will do to the organisation from now onwards.
Thank you, Hayley. I mean, just picking up on LGR, one of the conversations that we did have prior to the committee meeting was, how is the council going, at a member level, going to oversee what's happening with LGR? So I think this is a question for you, David, as leader of the council. Is this something that will fall to governance and audit going forward, or is it something that you're considering as the leader of the council in terms of a change of format, an introduction of an oversight committee or panel maybe that will have that overarching political view of what's happening with local government reform? And I think that's something that we need to get to grips with as 51 councillors sooner rather than later. I've got Councillor Sunnox next.
Yes, I'd echo that sentiment as well. We need to sort of get our heads around how it all works. I certainly haven't. Hayley, when it comes to this project risk management, it's taken a long time to get there. And I strongly suspect, having seen lots of your reports, that what you're trying to do is to aggregate the unaggregatable. You're trying to find a meaningful addition of apples and potatoes and not getting anywhere. Just give us the apples and the potatoes, the granular colour. And if there's projects you've missed or it's not complete, we understand that. We know that, you don't get the same projects coming up all the time. It's the granularity and the thinking, the process of what major projects have we got and where are they going wrong. And if it's, I don't know, Heart of Greenstead, take an example. That's a major project for us. It's other people's money. We're not even managing to spend it. Let's just look at it at a granular level. The second thing is that we've still got Fit for the Future coming up. We've got all sorts of risks that people walk out of the door and say, that's, I've had enough of this lot. we've only got one thing. If you actually look at Fit for the Future, it's one big saving, which is charging for the garden waste. And then it's a number of smaller things that, I'll be absolutely honest with you, I think they're just going to be washed away by the cost pressures, which are actually listed in the Section 25 report. So, question mark, is it right to continue with Fit for the Future? And if it isn't right to continue with it, how on earth will something turn up to close that budget gap in the coming years? So it's the same thing. We really need to look at a much bigger, more strategic restructuring of the council, which of course we're suggesting, than just just continuing with that Fit for the Future programme. It doesn't seem to be fit for the new future.
I obviously cannot respond in terms of whether Fit for the Future should continue or not. That's obviously a conversation that I will take back to Senior Leadership Board when we discuss the risk register. But I think probably it's something for the leader to respond to rather than me.
Yeah, you put your button on too quickly there, Hayley, because I was going to save you and direct that to that query or that comment to Councillor King.
Could I pick up the earlier remark about LGR as well? I'm sad enough to say every time I see you, isn't it fun to talk about risk? This really matters, not necessarily in its own right, but because it makes for better conversations both here and actually the fact that you have, and something we give you challenge on, Hayley, accept your word on this, and I see it, that there is, amongst the senior leadership, running conversation which is informed by your challenge as well as the challenge of the committee. So that's the context for me always about this. It's really important. So to LGR, the challenge is right. Don't have an answer because we're going up like this through the fog of material, government pronouncements, consultations. It's just, although it's been in the air since last autumn, it's only really just starting. And the partners, the 15 councils across Essex, have first of all got to get themselves closer to an understanding, and we're at the very foothills of that, but it's happening quite quickly. The pace of that will grow. We've started, I said it earlier, with the first things we should do, or the first two things we should do, Chair, which is ensure we keep members as cited as we can. I do that personally, as does Pam, and we've had a number of both cross Essex, one of which I've chaired, and Colchester City Council specific briefings using the same kind of material, because again, if you use different, you don't help anybody, we all hear it differently. I think that so far, to me, from feedback I've had, has hit the mark, but I absolutely we've got to get a bit more structured and look at how we might, the key challenge for us, manage our way through to 31st of March 28, and what all of that might mean through into a shadow unitary authority, and the 2 years, we're talking about this in the margins where we're not. So all of that we need to both get our head around, draw on relevant experience across the country in recent devolutions, but make it work for Colchester. So we've done the next and first thing we can do, and Councillor Dundas is part of this, is establish and get the consent of colleagues across the three members of the potential unitary, remember the words potential, to have a shadow board, which will draw us together regularly, senior officials and senior politicians. But I do agree we need some more structure, and I will take that away as something we'll have a conversation about and come back to you on. As to Fit for the Future, I won't extol its many virtues, or point out that every little helps in a world where there's a sea of troubles. But it is the vehicle, and across the whole of the City Council, including things which are going to increasingly matter in terms of the ability to raise money, as well as to having to spend it, like asset management, we're looking at everything. So that's in place, it's structured, it's supported, it's owned by the senior leadership, supported by the administration. That's the vehicle we'll use. We've said repeatedly, if we have to go deeper and further, and I agree, one-dimensionally we do, that's the vehicle we use. We build on what we've got. Some of the things that will happen over the next few months, some of the work we're doing for which there's not yet an answer, like the HRA review, in my view, we're wrong to jump ahead to its conclusions, but that will be a key factor. We will be looking again by the summer, Chair, at the budget, building on Fit for the Future, alive to HRA, alive to what assets we might realise and sell. Some of the ideas within your own, we're in it again, the budget debate tomorrow. You know, those things are going to come through in a structured way when we have the facts for it. So the difference between different parts of the chamber is smaller, I think, than it might appear. It's about our discipline is such that we will factor into the equation that lies ahead when we have the numbers that are solid rather than a projection. I don't doubt that that's reasonable politics, but in terms of practice and programme, which was your question, William, yes, Fit for the Future, and we build on it in the way I've just touched on. But Chair, you know, I'd hope we don't have to go too much into that ahead of tomorrow.
Thank you, Councillor King. Richard.
Sorry to go ahead of you, Councillor Smith. It was just on Fit for the Future. I feel I really need to set the record straight in terms of what it's delivered, because you know, there's an incredible amount of hard work that goes on from officers. People have lost their jobs because of it. We've made people redundant already as a result of this. So to kind of just summarise it as garden waste charging is really not fair. There's examples such as a sport and leisure restructure, which has resulted in, unfortunately, redundancies and reductions of costs of 150k already, culture and heritage savings of 220k, all of it's been delivered already. So they show the pedigree of Fit for the Future assets. The corporate landlord restructure, almost 300k of staff savings, redundancies, unfortunately, but I just don't think it's fair to keep saying that this is just garden waste charging when actually it's a whole lot more.
No, and I think the important point, Chair, here is to reinforce this. You know, the better part of 90% of targets set already achieved, but it's an expression of commitment. That's the thing we should agree on. You have to have a commitment to getting things right, to do what you need to go and do.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Kelly and Councillor Smith, and I just want to make a brief point at this stage. As members, we have a responsibility. We've looked at one of the I think it was very high risks of staff well-being. I think we need to be mindful in our remarks of staff well-being. It's quite right for us to robustly challenge the administration, to challenge officers about how they are delivering, but I think we need to be respectful in that challenge and be mindful, especially in the circumstances of local government reorganisation, of how that impacts on individual members of staff going forward. I'll pick you up in a while, Councillor Sunnox, but I've got Councillor Kelly first, then Councillor Smith.
I'm going to bring it back to the minutiae now, from that high-level stuff. Looking at the specifics of your very high risks, where you've got one outstanding still in the ICT one. I've been through your mitigations that you've got in there, and something that I don't see in it, but you might be doing it, is what I would term effectively fire drills. And whether you're doing fire drills and whether you're scoring those fire drills based on the effectiveness and the speed with which you're able to get back up and running again, such that if a malicious actor were to do something bad, how long the council would effectively be out of action for, and how long it would take for it to get back up and running again, and whether you're measuring that in hours or days.
It's happening. I can't give you the details because I don't know that, and that's down to our IT team. But I don't know whether the Chief Operating Officer has got any more information on that.
Through the Chair, yeah, absolutely it is. We've carried out disaster recovery exercises. We also do penetration testing as well, which you'll be familiar with around cyber security. So there is a lot, and actually we had a recent kind of near miss, if you like, or about 6 months ago now, where our partner authority Epping came under an attack, and that was actually a really good exercise for both councils to work through in terms of strengthening our cyber security almost in a real-time situation.
Thank you. All right.
Can you update can we get that risk being updated so it's actually got something in it? That'd be cool.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Councillor Smith.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I'd like to complain that Mr. Block nicked most of my speech for me there by pointing out all the things that Fit for the Future is doing.
Who's next? Oh, I thought you'd finished.
Yeah, I haven't finished, unfortunately. I do think, though, that when we're looking at the risk register, there is a point of we have local government reform paralysis. That the idea that we sit back and we do nothing for the next 2 or 3 years because it's all too difficult and it might change. If you do that, I think you're letting down the people, not just of this city, but of the other partner boroughs as well. That we need to be driving forward with the necessary reforms to keep the costs under control, to generate the extra income and to bring forward the systems. And I want to encourage our staff to know that what we're doing here is developing a good future for the city, but also for them as well, by having robust systems and effective managements in place in Leisure World, in waste, or wherever. That is what it's about. And the risk of sitting back and doing nothing would just encourage staff to be demotivated. They would, in many cases, vote with their feet, the more able ones, and perhaps those that are getting near to the age of 55 might be looking for other career options. I really do think, and I think your points were well made, Chair, that we need to be very careful about what we're saying at these meetings, not to give the impression that we're shutting up shop for the next 3 years.
Thank you. And I would just add, the most important thing is that we continue to effectively deliver services to residents. And I know from experience when Essex had Southend and Thurrock broke off, that it was essential that we kept the services that were going to the two unitary authorities going in an effective way. I'm going to bring Councillor Sunnox in, then I'll come back to you, Councillor King, and then I think we're going to, hopefully that will be opportunity to wrap up. Councillor Sunnox?
Yes, I want to make my intentions entirely clear. I am not criticising individuals. I'm talking about the future, and I'm trying to get the council to address the future. And I'm quite fed up with, whenever I do that, being accused of demotivating staff. I agree with Councillor Smith when he says that we've got to keep the momentum on. We've got to drive towards something. And we've got to keep staff feeling they have a purpose and a direction. And so I agree with that. But we won't give them a purpose and direction if we hide the problem away from the problems. We certainly won't do it if every time someone raises it, and it's happened to me before, I'm accused of demotivating people. That is not my intention. And you've known me long enough to know that I'm blunt in what I'm saying, but it's not personal and it's not intended to demotivate people.
Thank you, Councillor Sunnox. And I don't think I was intending that you were demotivating. I was being general in suggesting that we all need to be mindful of the impact of our comments, especially given local government review and the strictures that we know the council is having to operate under on frontline staff. Councillor Dundas, I'm going to allow you one
very
before
brief
I bring
comment.
in Councillor King.
Very brief comment. We have a full council budget tomorrow. I think if anybody listens to that, I don't think they'll see any lack of enthusiasm of ideas and opinions, and I think you'll see a lot of people very committed and passionate about the next 3 years.
Well said. Councillor King.
I'd love to agree with Paul. That's absolutely right. But a number of us have said also reflectively the right thing, which is we do send signals by how we speak, the language we use and where we gather. Tomorrow night, I hope all of us will sort of just bear that in mind. But I'm really clear from my experience in central and local government, this is a great place with some great people. And we can contest some of this, but ambition is absolutely the heart of it. That's why we keep some really good people. And to the central point about keeping the progress up, I think there is a joint view. We want to make sure always that we balance the books or have a prospect of doing that, and we'll do the right thing to make sure that that will happen, but that we still keep going, we don't stand still, we don't freeze. It is a legitimate risk, but everything we're doing is about ensuring we have resource to task, including, for those who've had the chance to look at the budget in any detail, the extra things we want to do. You know, conversation which I think cross-party is actually a shared place and point, which is legacy and dowry. We've got to get the balance between those, but we really want to press on. And I commit myself personally to making sure that happens. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, so we were asked to consider and comment on the Council's progress and performance in managing risk during the period from April to September 24. Consider and also comment on the current strategic risk register. I think we've done that. All agreed? Yeah. Thank you. That moves us on to the work programme then, Mr. Evans.
Thanks, Chair. There's only two things on the work programme for tonight, and that is that the Q3 budget monitoring report is delayed until the next meeting in March, and the capital report is delayed until another meeting. My understanding is that the new Section 151 officer wants to take a more personal look at that, which is indicated tonight. And other than that, that's just ask the committee to note those. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Sunnock.
Yes, I didn't know whether to raise it under the minutes of the meeting, because we don't have matters arising. But we did agree in December that we would do a response to the local government audit consultation. And I did a response, put quite a lot of effort into it, and I submitted it. Didn't really get an acknowledgement of it. And then we didn't do a response. Nothing more was heard. The deadline passed. And I feel this is quite bad form, because we've been, for the 2.5 years, nearly 3 years I've been a councillor, we've been blaming the national audit system, and we've been blaming the national firms. And I therefore feel, I know no one listened to it, but I really feel we should have presented an alternative to it. I suspect it run away because everyone was too busy, but I still think that, you know, next time if we say we're going to do something, we should try to do it, or at least there should be acknowledgement and we shouldn't do it, or leave it to someone else to do. Say, William, well, if you want to do it, you do it yourself and organise it.
Thank you, William. I think that's a valid point, because we did task someone to go away and produce a report and then circulate to us. I know I had some input in terms of just a reply to the draft regional response to that consultation, but you're quite right. We did say that we wanted to produce something from Colchester City Council, and I think we just need to report our disquiet, let's use that word, that it wasn't done.
Let's not be too hard on ourselves, and it doesn't affect the going forward audit programme either. It's just next time it comes up, we need to, you know, we need to be in there on it.
I'd just like to accept that, if I might. There's loads of consultations all over the shop, and we do, I think, in the round, a good job of making sure we take the opportunity. Sometimes we're heard, back to your point, and sometimes we're not. So my apologies. Thanks.
Okay, anything else on the work programme? Nope. All agreed? Meeting closed. Thank you very much for all your contributions this evening.